The transport shuttle landed with a dull thud on the gray platform of Thalros 9. Dae-jung pressed his face against the small window and stared at his new workplace. The Dragon Reserve stretched before him like a prison made of metal and glass. Massive enclosures rose into the pale sky, their walls thick enough to hold creatures that could tear through starship hulls. This was not what he had imagined when he applied to the Galactic Concordance. Dae-jung grabbed his single bag and stepped onto the platform. The air smelled sterile, like a hospital. He had spent 4 years studying xenobiology on Earth, dreaming of understanding alien life. He had written 12 research proposals about cross-species communication. The Concordance rejected every single one. Instead, they offered him this job: maintenance worker at a Dragon Reserve on a planet nobody cared about. "You must be the new human," a voice said behind him. Dae-jung turned to see a man in a gray uniform. He was older, maybe 50, with tired eyes and a permanent frown. His name badge read, Hyun, Senior Keeper. "I'm Dae-jung," he said, extending his hand. Hyun looked at the hand but didn't shake it. "Follow me. I'll show you the facility. Try not to touch anything important." They walked through corridors that hummed with machinery. Everything was clean and cold. Workers passed them without making eye contact. Most were aliens, tall insectoid creatures with clicking mandibles, floating crystalline beings that chimed when they moved, and a few other humans who looked as unhappy as Hyun. "This is the observation deck," Hyun said, stopping at a massive window. Dae-jung's breath caught in his throat. 5 dragons lay in separate enclosures below. They were enormous, each one the size of a commercial aircraft. Their scales shifted colors like oil on water, deep purples, blues, and blacks that seemed to absorb light. Wings that could unfold to block out the sun lay folded against their sides. These were void dragons, creatures that could survive in the vacuum of space, beings that had existed for thousands of years. But something was wrong. The dragons barely moved. They lay like massive statues, their eyes half closed. Their scales looked dull, almost gray in places. One of them, the largest, hadn't even lifted its head when the observation lights turned on. "They're sick," Dae-jung whispered. "They're dying," Hyun corrected. "Have been for 30 years. We've tried everything. The best scientists in the Concordance work here. Nothing helps." "What do you feed them?" Hyun shrugged. "Standard nutrient slurry. It has everything a dragon needs: proteins, minerals, vitamins. The formula was designed by the top xenobiologists in the galaxy." "But they eat it?" "Barely. Come on. Your shift starts in an hour. I'll show you the feeding area." The feeding station was a cold room filled with large tanks. Gray liquid bubbled in each one, looking exactly like wet cement. The smell was neutral, almost like nothing. Large tubes connected the tanks to the enclosures above. "Your job is simple," Hyun explained. "Every morning you pump the slurry through the tubes into the feeding troughs. You check the levels, clean the troughs, and document how much they eat. That's it. Don't try to interact with the dragons. Don't try to change anything. Just do the job and go home." "That's all?" Dae-jung asked. "That's all. The scientists do the important work. We just maintain the systems." Hyun's voice was bitter. "I used to think I could help them too. 20 years ago. Save your energy, kid. The dragons are beyond saving." That night, Dae-jung couldn't sleep. His small quarters felt like a box, barely big enough for a bed and a desk. He thought about the dragons lying in their enclosures, slowly fading away. He thought about the gray slurry, nutritionally perfect, but utterly lifeless. He remembered his grandmother back on Earth. She had raised him after his parents died. Every meal she cooked was an event. Kimchi that took weeks to ferment properly, stews that simmered for hours, rice that had to be washed 7 times. "Food is not just fuel," she would say. "Food is memory. Food is love. Food is culture. The Concordance's slurry had nutrients, but it had no soul. The next morning, Daejong arrived early for his first feeding. Hyun supervised while Daejong activated the pumps. The gray liquid flowed through the transparent tubes up into the enclosures. Through the observation window, Daejong watched the slurry pour into large metal troughs. The dragons didn't move at first. Eventually, the smallest one, a dragon named Eula, according to the display, dragged herself to the trough. She sniffed the slurry and turned away. After a long moment, she took a single, reluctant mouthful. "That's better than usual," Hyun said. "Sometimes they don't eat at all." Daejong watched Eula return to her corner and curl up. Her eyes looked empty, like someone waiting to die. The other dragons ignored the food completely. "How long can they survive like this?" Daejong asked. "Years, maybe decades. Dragons are tough, but they're not living. They're just existing." Hyun turned away from the window. "Document the feeding levels and clean the troughs this afternoon. I'll be in the office if you need anything, which you won't." Alone in the feeding station, Daejong stared at the tanks of gray slurry. He thought about Eula's empty eyes. He thought about his grandmother's kitchen, always filled with the smell of garlic and pepper and fermented vegetables. He made a decision that would change everything. That evening, instead of going to the cafeteria, Daejong returned to his quarters. He had brought seeds from Earth, a small personal allowance that most humans never used. He had been growing them in pots by his window, chili peppers, garlic, spring onions. He also had a small stash of supplies his grandmother had packed: gochugaru pepper flakes, dried seaweed, sesame oil. Daejong sat on his bed and started planning. He knew the rules. No unauthorized contact with the dragons, no alterations to their diet, no deviations from protocol, but he also knew something else. The dragons were dying not because they lacked nutrients. They were dying because they had nothing to live for. He would break the rules. He would cook for them. Daejong woke at 4 in the morning, 2 hours before his shift. His tiny quarters had a basic cooking unit meant for heating pre-made meals. He had never used it for actual cooking before. Today, that would change. He pulled out the ingredients he had gathered. From his personal rations, he had saved 3 days' worth of synthetic meat. It wasn't real beef, but it would do. He had fresh garlic cloves from his plants, green onions, and his precious supply of gochugaru pepper flakes. He also had a small jar of doenjang, fermented soybean paste his grandmother had somehow smuggled past customs. His hands shook as he worked. If anyone caught him, he would be fired and sent back to Earth. But he couldn't stop thinking about Eula's eyes, empty and hopeless. Daejong chopped the garlic and onions, mixing them with the gochugaru and sesame oil. He marinated the synthetic meat, letting the flavors soak in. The smell filled his small room. Spicy, pungent, alive. It smelled like home. He cooked the meat on high heat until it sizzled and caramelized at the edges. He made a small pot of rice and mixed it with sesame oil and salt. The final touch was a small portion of kimchi. He had been fermenting it for 3 weeks in a sealed container under his bed. It wasn't perfect, but it was ready. By 5:30, he had everything packed in a thermal container. He slipped through the empty corridors toward the dragon enclosures. His heart pounded. Security cameras tracked movement, but at this hour, nobody monitored them actively. The night shift workers were usually half asleep at their stations. The enclosure doors required a key card. Daejong's card shouldn't have worked. He was just maintenance staff. But Hyun had accidentally left his senior card on the desk yesterday. Daejong had borrowed it. He would return it before anyone noticed. The door hissed open. Inside, the enclosure was vast and dim. The ceiling stretched high above, reinforced with metal beams strong enough to hold a dragon's weight. The floor was bare rock, cold and lifeless. In the far corner, Eula lay curled into herself, her breathing slow and shallow. Dae-jung stepped inside. His legs felt weak. Eula was small for a dragon, but she was still massive. Her head alone was larger than his entire body. One angry breath could kill him. "Eula?" he whispered. The dragon didn't move. Dae-jung set the thermal container on the ground and opened it. The smell of spicy meat and fermented kimchi wafted into the enclosure. He stepped back, giving her space. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Eula's nostril flared. Her eyes opened, just slightly. Her head lifted off the ground, moving slowly, like someone waking from a deep sleep. She sniffed the air. Her eyes opened wider. Dae-jung held his breath. Eula pushed herself up onto her front legs. She moved toward the container, her massive body making the ground tremble slightly. She lowered her head and sniffed the food. Her eyes changed color, shifting from dull gray to a brighter blue. She ate, not reluctantly, not out of obligation. She ate like someone who had forgotten what hunger felt like and was suddenly reminded. She devoured the rice, the meat, the kimchi. She licked the container clean. Then she looked at Dae-jung. For the first time, he saw intelligence in those eyes, real awareness. She tilted her head, studying him. A low sound rumbled in her throat, not threatening, but curious. "I'll come back tomorrow," Dae-jung whispered. He grabbed the empty container and ran. For the next 3 weeks, Dae-jung followed the same routine. Wake at 4, cook, sneak into Eula's enclosure before dawn, leave the food, and escape before his official shift started. He documented the regular slurry feedings as required, never mentioning the extra meals. Eula transformed before his eyes. Her scales grew brighter. She moved with more energy. Most importantly, her eyes were alive again. She began waiting for him by the door every morning, making soft chirping sounds when he arrived. On the 4th week, Dae-jung brought food to a different enclosure. Nathara, the oldest dragon, hadn't eaten the official slurry in 5 days. The scientists were worried she might be entering her final decline. Dae-jung prepared a different meal for her, less spicy, more savory. He grilled the meat with garlic and doenjang, creating a rich, earthy flavor. He added mushrooms he had traded for with another worker. When he entered Nathara's enclosure, the ancient dragon was lying completely still. Her scales were almost entirely gray. Her breathing was barely visible. "Please," Dae-jung said softly. "Just try it." He set the food near her head and backed away. Minutes passed. Dae-jung was about to give up when Nathara's eye opened. Just one eye, ancient and tired. She looked at the food, then at Dae-jung. She sniffed. Then she ate. As she finished the meal, something incredible happened. Nathara's scales began to shimmer with color, deep purple and midnight blue, like the void of space itself. She lifted her head fully for the first time in months. She made a sound low and resonant that vibrated through Dae-jung's chest. It felt like gratitude. Word spread among the dragons faster than Dae-jung expected. Within days, all 5 dragons were waiting for him every morning. He learned their preferences quickly. Kos loved sour flavors, so Dae-jung made him kimchi stew with extra fermented paste. Vireth preferred sweet and spicy, so he created a gochujang glaze with honey. Talmon liked crunchy textures, so Dae-jung roasted vegetables until they were crispy. The dragons grew stronger every day. Their scales brightened. They moved around their enclosures. They made sounds to each other, low rumbles and chirps that seemed like conversation. But Dae-jung's secret couldn't last forever. Hyun noticed first. One morning, he came to the feeding station early and found Dae-jung cleaning his thermal container. "What's that?" Hyun asked. "Nothing, just my breakfast container." Hyun walked to the observation window and stared down at the dragons. All 5 were active, moving around their enclosures. Nathara was actually stretching her wings, something she hadn't done in years. "The dragons are thriving," Hyun said slowly. The scientists are baffled. Dragon health has improved 40% in 3 weeks. They don't know why. He turned to look at Dae-jung. But I think I do. Dae-jung's heart sank. Hyun, please. What are you feeding them? There was no point lying. Food, real food, Korean food from Earth. Hyun stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, a real laugh, the first Dae-jung had heard from him. You crazy kid. You're breaking about 50 regulations. I know, but look at them, really look. Hyun turned back to the window. Below, Eula was playing, actually playing, jumping between platforms like a young dragon should. Nathara watched her with what could only be described as contentment. I won't report you, Hyun said finally. But others will notice soon. The scientists, the administrators. When they figure it out, this will become a problem much bigger than you or me. Then we have a little time, Dae-jung said. Help me make it count. Hyun was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. What do you need? More ingredients, better equipment, and someone to cover for me when I'm cooking. Hyun smiled. A real smile. My wife is Korean. I'll call her. She'll know where to get what you need. For the first time since arriving on Thalros 9, Dae-jung felt hope. The dragons were coming back to life, and nobody could stop it now. The discovery came exactly 5 weeks after Dae-jung's first secret meal. A scientist named Vril, an insectoid creature with compound eyes and clicking mandibles, was reviewing health data when he noticed the pattern. Dragon vitality had increased 60%. Their appetite had returned. Most shocking of all, Nathara had stood up and walked the length of her enclosure, something she hadn't done in 3 years. Vril brought the data to his colleagues. They ran tests. They analyzed the dragon's blood. They found traces of compounds that shouldn't exist in their systems. Capsaicin, fermented lactobacillus, garlic enzymes, earth compounds. The investigation took 4 days. Security footage was reviewed. Dae-jung was seen entering the enclosures before dawn. His quarters were searched. They found his cooking equipment, his ingredient stash, his grandmother's recipes written in Korean on scraps of paper. On a gray Tuesday morning, Dae-jung was summoned to the administrative office. Director Ji-won sat behind a glass desk. She was human, maybe 40 years old, with sharp eyes and a colder demeanor than any alien Dae-jung had met. 2 security guards stood by the door. Vril was there too, his mandibles clicking in what Dae-jung had learned was disapproval. Sit down, Ji-won said. Dae-jung sat. His hands were shaking, but he kept them in his lap. Do you know why you're here? Yes. You violated quarantine protocols. You introduced unauthorized biological materials into a protected xenobiological reserve. You contaminated 5 irreplaceable specimens with Earth pathogens. Ji-won's voice was ice. Do you understand the severity of these charges? I was feeding them, Dae-jung said quietly. They were already being fed, a nutritionally perfect diet designed by the best xenobiologists in the galaxy. They were starving. Vril's mandibles clicked loudly. The specimens were receiving optimal nutrition. What they were experiencing was natural decline due to age and captivity stress. Your interference has contaminated 30 years of research data. They're not specimens, Dae-jung said, his voice rising. They're living beings, and they were dying because you were treating them like machines. That's enough, Ji-won snapped. The Galactic Concordance Council has called an emergency session. You will present yourself before them tomorrow. They will decide your punishment. Until then, you're confined to quarters. What about the dragons? They'll return to standard feeding protocols immediately. No. Dae-jung stood up. You can't. They'll stop eating again. They'll... Guards, remove him. The security guards grabbed his arms. As they dragged him toward the door, Dae-jung shouted, Ask them! The dragons can communicate! Ask them what they want! The door slammed shut behind him. That night, locked in his quarters, Dae-jung paced like a caged animal. Through his small window, he could see the dragon enclosures in the distance. He imagined them confused, waiting for him, wondering why he hadn't come. The thought made his chest ache. At midnight, someone knocked softly on his door. "It's me," Hyan's voice said. The door opened. Hyan slipped inside quickly, looking over his shoulder. "They're putting you on trial tomorrow, the whole Concordance Council." "I know. It's bad, kid. Really bad. Half the council wants you imprisoned for biological contamination. The other half wants you exiled from Concordant space entirely." Dae-jung slumped onto his bed. "I just wanted to help them." "I know." Hyan sat down beside him. "But here's something the administrators don't know yet. The dragons stopped eating the moment they took you away. All 5 of them. They won't touch the slurry." Dae-jung looked up. "What?" "Eula has been crying. Actual crying, tears that glow in the dark. Nathara won't move. Koss tried to break through his enclosure door. The scientists are panicking. Because their research specimens are acting up? No." Hyan smiled grimly. "Because Talman spoke." "What?" "He hasn't spoken in 100 years. Nobody even knew he could anymore. But today, he spoke in the old dragon language. It took them 6 hours to translate. Do you know what he said?" Dae-jung shook his head. "He said, 'Let the human feed us, or we choose death.'" The trial was held in the Grand Council chamber, a massive room with holographic displays showing representatives from 30 different alien species. Dae-jung stood alone in the center, feeling very small. The charges were read: biological contamination, protocol violation, endangerment of protected species, corruption of scientific data. Ji-won spoke first, presenting the case against him. She showed footage of him sneaking into the enclosures. She showed the chemical analysis of the dragon's blood, highlighting the dangerous foreign compounds. She argued that his actions were reckless and selfish. Then Vril spoke. "Humans are emotionally unstable. They cannot separate sentiment from science. This individual acted out of misguided compassion, but compassion without wisdom is dangerous. We must maintain strict protocols to protect species we do not fully understand." A crystalline being named Hashten chimed in agreement. "The dragons are ancient and irreplaceable. We cannot risk them for one human's feelings." Finally, Dae-jung was allowed to speak. His throat was dry. Hundreds of eyes, alien and human, watched him. He thought about giving a carefully prepared speech. Instead, he spoke from his heart. "You're all wrong," he said. "Not about the protocols, not about the science. You're wrong about what the dragons need." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "You've given them perfect nutrition, perfect temperature control, perfect medical care, but you haven't given them a reason to live. Food isn't just nutrients. It's culture, it's experience, it's connection. You've been feeding their bodies while starving their souls." "Souls?" Vril clicked derisively. "Unscientific anthropomorphism." "Is it?" Dae-jung turned to face the council directly. "The dragons improved 60% in 5 weeks, not because of better nutrition. The chemical composition of what I fed them was actually inferior to your slurry. They improved because food meant something, because someone cared enough to make it special. Because for the first time in decades, eating wasn't just survival, it was living." "Empty philosophy," Hashten chimed. "Then explain why they're refusing to eat now. Explain why Talman broke his century of silence. Explain why—" A deep, resonant sound interrupted him. It came from the speakers, from the live feed of the dragon enclosures. All 5 dragons were standing at their enclosure windows, facing toward the council chamber kilometers away. They were making sounds in unison, a harmony that vibrated through the floor. The translator struggled to process it. Then words appeared on the screens. "Let him feed us, or we die." The council chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted at each other. Security tried to restore order. Ji-won looked pale. Vril's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Dae-jung now recognized as panic. A booming voice cut through the noise. "Silence." Everyone froze. The voice came from the dragon feed. Nithara had moved to the very front of her enclosure. Her ancient eyes stared directly into the camera. The translator worked again. "We are not your specimens. We are not your prisoners. For 30 years you have kept us alive but given us no life. The human understood what you could not. He gave us not just food, but respect. Not just meals, but meaning." Talman's voice joined hers. "We demand the human. If you refuse, we refuse to continue." The 5 dragons stopped making sounds. They simply stared at the cameras, waiting. The lead council member, an elderly alien called Morven, spoke slowly. "Is this an ultimatum?" "Yes," all 5 dragons responded together. The council went into emergency deliberation. Dae-jung was escorted to a waiting room. Hyun managed to slip in briefly. "They're terrified," Hyun whispered. "The dragons are too valuable to lose. But if they give in to your methods, it challenges everything the Concordance believes about proper xenobiological care." 3 hours later, Dae-jung was brought back to the chamber. Morven spoke. "The council has reached a decision. Dae-jung of Earth, your methods are unorthodox and potentially dangerous. However, the dragons have made their wishes clear. You will be given 6 months to prove your approach works long-term. You will be assigned a team and proper resources. But you will be monitored constantly. Any sign that your methods are harmful, and you will be removed immediately. And if I succeed, then we will reassess our entire approach to xenobiological care." Morven's expression was unreadable. "Don't make us regret this." Dae-jung allowed himself to breathe. "Thank you. Don't thank us yet. You have 6 months to change everything we thought we knew. The whole galaxy is watching." As Dae-jung left the chamber, he heard Nithara's voice one more time through the speakers. "Thank you, young human." He smiled. The real work was about to begin. The message reached Earth 3 days after the trial. Dae-jung sat in his newly assigned office, much larger than his old quarters, and composed the most important request of his life. "Mina, I need you. I need your skills, your knowledge, everything you learned from Grandma. I have 6 months to prove that food can save dying dragons. I can't do this alone. Please come." He hit send and waited. The reply came 18 hours later. "I'm packing already. I'm bringing help. See you in 2 weeks." Mina arrived on a Tuesday with 3 others. Dae-jung barely recognized his sister. She had grown up while he was away studying. She was 25 now, confident and professional in her chef's uniform. Her eyes sparkled when she saw him. "Little brother." She hugged him hard enough to hurt. "You're insane, cooking for dragons. Only you would think of this." "I learned from the best." He turned to her companions. "Who did you bring?" "This is Taeyang." She gestured to a man in his 40s with kind eyes and strong hands. "Master fermenter. He can make kimchi that would make Grandma cry with joy. This is Bora, specialist in traditional recipes. She knows dishes from 500 years ago. And this is Junho, my sous chef and the best prep cook I've ever worked with." They shook hands. These 3 had left their lives on Earth, their restaurants and families, to help dragons they'd never met. "Thank you," Dae-jung said quietly. "You have no idea what this means." "Actually, we do," Bora said, smiling. "Your sister showed us the footage. The way that old dragon looked at the camera and demanded you, that's not just hunger, that's connection. That's worth flying across the galaxy for." The Concordance gave them a full kitchen. It was sterile and efficient, designed by aliens who thought of cooking as a chemical process. Mina took one look and started making changes immediately. We need proper heat sources. Real fire, not these temperature-controlled heating elements. We need fermentation rooms with exact humidity control. We need prep stations, woks, proper ventilation. She turned to Daijung. Get me a meeting with whoever controls the budget. This kitchen is useless. Ji-won approved the renovations with barely concealed skepticism. You have 2 weeks to set up. Then we begin formal observations. The team worked day and night. Taiyang set up fermentation chambers in a converted storage room, lining the walls with clay pots filled with cabbage, radishes, and soybeans. The smell was pungent and alive, nothing like the sterile facility was used to. Vril complained constantly. This odor is contaminating the air systems. This is a scientific facility, not a food market. Get used to it, Mina said cheerfully. This is what real food smells like. While the kitchen was being built, Daejung spent time with the dragons. They had returned to eating his simple meals, but they were waiting for something more. He could feel it in the way they watched him. One evening, Nathara lowered her massive head until her eye was level with him. He felt something in his mind. Not words exactly, but feelings, images. A memory of flying through a nebula, tasting cosmic dust and solar winds. The joy of discovering a new planet. The sorrow of being caged. I understand, he whispered. You don't just miss freedom. You miss experience, new things, wonder. The feeling in his mind shifted to something like agreement, like hope. When the kitchen was finally ready, Mina called a team meeting. We're not just feeding 5 dragons, we're bringing them back to life. Every meal has to be special. Every meal has to tell a story. She looked at each of them. Taiyang, your fermentation is our foundation. The depth, the complexity. Bora, your traditional recipes are our connection to history and culture. Junho, your prep work is what holds everything together. And Daijung, you're our bridge to understanding what they need. What about you? Junho asked. I'm the conductor. I make sure we create symphonies, not just meals. The first official feeding was scheduled for the following Monday. The entire Concordant Science team would observe. Success or failure would determine everything. Mina planned an ambitious menu. 5 courses, each designed for a specific dragon based on what Daejung had learned about their preferences. But more than that, each course would tell a story about Earth, about human culture, about the connection between food and meaning. The morning arrived. The observation deck was crowded with scientists, administrators, and council observers. Cameras recorded everything. Daijung felt the pressure like a weight on his chest. Don't think about them, Mina said, tying her chef's apron. Think about the dragons. Cook with your heart, like Grandma taught us. The first course was for Eula, the youngest. Mina prepared a spicy rice cake dish called tteokbokki, sweet and fiery and playful. She arranged it beautifully, the red sauce gleaming. Daejung carried it into Eula's enclosure personally. The young dragon bounded toward him, making excited chirping sounds. She ate eagerly, and as she did, Daejung felt emotions radiating from her. Joy, playfulness, youth. When she finished, she nuzzled his shoulder gently, careful not to hurt him. The second course was for Kos. Taiyang had prepared a deeply fermented kimchi stew with aged doenjang. The smell was powerful, almost overwhelming. Kos inhaled deeply before eating, savoring the aroma. As he ate, he rumbled with contentment. The third course was for Vireth. Bora had created a honey gochujang glazed dish from a recipe 300 years old, balanced perfectly between sweet and spicy. Vireth ate slowly, deliberately, clearly savoring each bite. The fourth was for Talman. Junho had prepared crispy vegetables and protein with so many textures that each bite was different. Talman's eyes brightened with each crunch, his expression almost playful. The fifth course was for Nathara. This was Mina's masterpiece. A delicate, savory soup with handmade dumplings, flavored with aged ingredients, and finished with a touch of sesame oil. It was refined, ancient, respectful. Dae-jung knelt as he presented it to her. Nathara looked at the bowl, then at him. She ate slowly, and as she did, Dae-jung felt her memories washing over him. He saw her as a young dragon, flying through the cosmos with others of her kind. He felt her joy at discovery, her wonder at the universe's beauty. He felt her grief when her companions died, one by one. He felt her despair at captivity, at being studied and preserved like a museum piece. And now, he felt something new. Gratitude, hope, a reason to continue. When she finished, Nathara made a sound, deep, resonant, beautiful. The other dragons joined in, creating a harmony that shook the walls. In the observation deck, the scientists stood in stunned silence. Vril's mandibles had stopped clicking. Jiwon's cold expression had cracked into something like wonder. Even Hashten, the crystalline being, was pulsing with colors that indicated surprise. Morven, the council lead, spoke into his communicator. "Document everything. This is unprecedented." But the team wasn't finished. "This isn't just about food," Mina announced to the observers. "It's about culture, experience, connection. Tonight we're hosting a feast, a traditional Korean banquet. 9 courses, music, stories, everything that makes a meal meaningful." "Impossible," Vril clicked. "The dragons can't leave their enclosures." "Then we bring the feast to them? We set up in the central courtyard where all 5 can see and hear everything. We share the experience together." Jiwon started to object, then stopped. She looked at the dragons, all 5 standing alert, and engaged in a way they hadn't been in decades. "Do it," she said quietly. That night, under the artificial stars of Thalros 9, they held the feast. The team cooked continuously, presenting course after course. Between courses, Mina told stories about Earth, about families gathering for meals, about grandmothers passing down recipes, about food as love made visible. The dragons listened. Through his connection with them, Dae-jung felt their responses. They shared their own stories in return, memories of worlds they'd visited, of cosmic wonders they'd witnessed, of the joy of flight and discovery. The alien observers watched in silence. Many were crying, even species that supposedly didn't cry. By the end of the 9th course, something extraordinary had happened. The dragons weren't just healthier, they were transformed. Their scales gleamed with colors that hadn't been seen in years. Their eyes were bright and focused. Most importantly, they were connected to each other, to the humans, to life itself. Nathara spoke, her words translated for all to hear. "For decades we existed. Tonight, we lived." In his corner of the observation deck, Hyun wiped his eyes. "You did it, kid. You actually did it." But Dae-jung knew the truth. They hadn't finished. This was just the beginning. The dragons had tasted life again. Now they would hunger for more than just food. They would hunger for purpose, for meaning, for freedom. The transformation was undeniable. Within 2 months, the dragons had regained 90% of their physical strength. They moved with grace and power. Their scales shimmered with vibrant colors. Medical scans showed improvements that the scientists called miraculous. But something else was happening, something deeper than physical health. The dragons were becoming restless. Dae-jung noticed it first during a morning feeding. Eula paced her enclosure, looking up at the sky. Kos pressed against the walls, testing their strength. Even Nathara, usually calm and dignified, seemed agitated. "They're getting stronger," Hyun observed. "Maybe too strong for captivity." "It's not just physical," Dae-jung said. "We gave them back their will to live. Now they remember what they're living for." "Freedom," Mina said quietly. She had been watching the dragons, too. We fed their bodies and their souls. Now their souls want what any living being wants, to choose their own path. The Concordance Council reconvened for their 4-month evaluation. The evidence was overwhelming. The Dragon program had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Other alien species in Concordance care were already requesting human caretakers. Morven addressed the assembly. The results speak for themselves. The human approach to care has proven effective. We propose expanding the program across all Concordance facilities. Vril stood to speak. His mandibles clicked slowly. Dae-jung had learned this meant he was thinking carefully. I was wrong, Vril said simply. I opposed the human methods because they defied our scientific understanding, but science must adapt to evidence. The dragons are thriving. I formally recommend that Dae-jung and his team be granted permanent positions as Chief of Dragon Cultural Integration. The chamber murmured with surprise. Even Ji-won looked shocked. Furthermore, Vril continued, I recommend we study human cultural practices more broadly. They understand something about care that we have missed. The vote was unanimous. That night, the team celebrated in their kitchen. Taeyang opened a bottle of rice wine he had been saving. Bora cooked a feast. Junho laughed harder than Dae-jung had ever heard him laugh. We did it, Mina said, raising her glass. We saved the dragons. But Dae-jung couldn't fully celebrate. He kept thinking about Eula's pacing, about Nathara's distant stares at the sky. 3 days later, he entered Nathara's enclosure alone. The ancient dragon watched him approach. What's wrong? He asked softly. The answer came not in words but in feelings. Images flooded his mind, the vastness of space, the freedom of flight, the joy of discovery. Then contrasting images, walls, observation cameras, the same enclosure day after day. You want to leave? Dae-jung whispered. The feeling that came back was complex. Gratitude for what he had done, affection for the team. But yes, underneath it all, a desperate longing for the stars. I understand, he said, but I don't know if the Concordance will let you go. You're too valuable, too rare. Nethera's response was clear. A life without choice was not truly a life, no matter how comfortable the cage. Dae-jung called an emergency meeting with his team, Hyun, and surprisingly, Ji-won. He explained what he had learned from Nathara. They want to leave? Ji-won looked stricken. After everything we've done? Because of everything we've done, Mina corrected. We reminded them what it means to be alive. You can't give someone back their soul and expect them to stay in prison. They're not prisoners. They're protected. The universe is dangerous for them. It's their universe, Dae-jung said. Their danger to face. Their choice to make. Hyun leaned back in his chair. If you propose releasing them, the council will refuse. The dragons are the crown jewels of the Concordance Conservation Program. They'll never let them go. Then we need to let the dragons speak for themselves. The petition reached the Grand Council 3 days later. All 5 dragons formally requested their freedom. Not immediately, they acknowledged they needed time to prepare for life in the wild again, but they wanted a path forward, a goal beyond comfortable captivity. The council's response was swift and negative. Absolutely not, Morven declared. The dragons are irreplaceable. In the wild, they could be hunted, hurt, lost. We have a duty to protect them. Protect them or control them, Dae-jung challenged. There's a difference. You've done excellent work, young human. Don't overreach. But Talman had other plans. The ancient dragon who had broken his century of silence spoke again, this time to the entire Concordance through the public communication channels. We thank the Concordance for keeping us alive. We thank the humans for teaching us to live again. But now we choose our own path. We will leave Concordance space with or without permission. If you try to stop us, we will fight. We prefer freedom and risk over safety and captivity. The message caused chaos across the galaxy. Some species supported the dragon's rights. Others feared losing them. The debate raged for weeks. Finally, a compromise was reached. The dragons would be granted conditional freedom. They could leave concordant space, but would return twice a year for health checks and cultural exchanges. They would become ambassadors between species rather than specimens to be preserved. Most importantly, they would choose where to go and what to do. The day of their release was declared a galactic holiday. Species from across the concordance came to witness it. The dragons had spent months preparing, regaining their full strength. Practicing flight in the expanded enclosures Daijung had convinced the council to build. Daijung stood with his team in the courtyard as the enclosure walls were lowered for the first time in 30 years. The dragons emerged slowly, savoring the moment. They stretched their wings, massive, beautiful, spanning wider than any ship. The artificial light of Thalros 9 caught their scales, making them shimmer like liquid starlight. Nathara approached Daijung one last time. She lowered her head until they were eye to eye. The feeling that passed between them was beyond words. Gratitude, friendship, a bond that would last forever, even across the vastness of space. "Thank you," Daijung whispered, "for trusting me, for teaching me what care really means." The feeling returned, not goodbye, but until we meet again. One by one, the dragons lifted into the air. They circled once over the facility, their movements synchronizing into a graceful dance. Then they turned toward the sky and accelerated, breaking through the atmosphere in seconds. Through the telescopes, observers watched them enter space. They flew together, spinning and diving, celebrating their freedom with a joy that was visible even from a distance. Eula performed a loop that would have been impossible when she first met Daijung. Kos roared with pleasure, the sound captured by monitoring equipment and broadcast across the concordance. Talman flew faster than he had in a century, racing through the stars, and Nathara, ancient Nathara, opened her wings to their full span and glowed with colors that astronomers said looked like a new nebula being born. Mina put her arm around her brother's shoulders. "You gave them back their wings." "We all did," Daijung said, looking at his team. "All of us together." 5 years passed. Daijung's program expanded beyond anything he had imagined. Humans were now serving as cultural caregivers throughout concordant space. The entire approach to xenobiological conservation had been revolutionized. Food, culture, and respect had become as important as medical care and nutrition. Daijung himself had become something of a legend. Other species sought his advice. He trained new teams, teaching them not just cooking techniques but the philosophy behind them. Every being deserves not just survival, but meaning. Hyun had been promoted to director of the entire facility. Jiwon had written 3 papers on the importance of cultural consideration in alien care. Even Vril had become an advocate, learning to cook simple dishes himself. The dragons returned twice a year as promised. They brought stories of the worlds they had visited, the wonders they had witnessed. They had found other dragons, hidden in remote corners of the galaxy, and were slowly rebuilding their population. On the 5th anniversary of their release, Daijung received a special message. Nethera requested his presence on a small moon in neutral space. He arrived to find all 5 dragons waiting. But they weren't alone. 3 young dragons, barely a year old, tumbled and played around them. "Is this—" Daijung couldn't finish the sentence. Nethara's response filled his mind with warmth. The first dragon children born in 2 centuries. New life, new hope, a future. "They wanted to meet you," a voice said. Daijung turned to see a young woman approaching, his niece, just 2 years old when he left Earth, now a curious 7-year-old. "Mina brought me," she said shyly. "She said I should meet the dragons, that they're family." Mina emerged from the shuttle, smiling. You're training the next generation of xenobiologists. I thought I should start training the next generation of dragon chefs. One of the young dragons, brave like Eula had been, approached the little girl. She giggled as it sniffed her hair. Daijung watched them interact, his heart full. This was what he had really given the dragons. Not just food, not just health, not even just freedom. He had given them a future. That evening they held a feast under the stars of 3 moons. The team cooked together. Daijung, Mina, Taeyang, Bora, and Junho, joined now by a dozen new chefs from different species. The dragons ate and shared stories. The young dragons learned about Earth and kimchi and the strange human concept of cooking as love. As the celebration continued, Nathara pulled Daijung aside one more time. She shared a final feeling with him. Pride, not in herself, but in him. Pride in the human who had seen past species and protocol to recognize one simple truth. All beings, no matter how different, share the same fundamental needs: food, connection, purpose, choice, love. Daijung looked up at the stars thinking about his grandmother. She had been right all along. Food was never just fuel. It was memory, culture, connection. It was love made visible, made tangible, made shareable across any distance, even between species, even across the galaxy. He had only one job when he arrived on Thalros 9, feed the dragons. What he offered them was so much more. He offered them life itself. And in return, they had taught him the most important lesson of all. When you care for someone, truly care, you don't just sustain them. You give them the strength to fly. Under the light of 3 moons, surrounded by dragons young and old, by his team and his family, Daijung finally understood. He had found his purpose, not in grand research or scientific breakthroughs, but in the simple, profound act of caring. And the universe was better for it.